I'd like to call to order the Academic Goals and Instructional Improvement Committee. May we have a roll call, please?
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Bofi?
Present.
Mr. Davis?
Present.
Miss Edmonston? Miss Edmonston?
Yeah.
Mr. Garvey?
Here.
Miss Holloway?
Here.
Dr. Jones?
Here.
Miss Lewis is not in attendance. Miss Orange Jones stepped out. Mr. Rock?
Present.
Dr. Thomason?
Present.
Miss Vaucher?
Here.
Miss Hilburn? You have a quorum.
What's our first item?
Your consent agenda is ready for your approval, adding items 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3.
Is there a motion to approve our consent agenda? Thank you, Mr. Rock. A second by Mr. Garvey. Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your first item is on page 3, item 3.1, consideration of the local education agency request submitted by St. Martin Parish School System to waive policy outlined in Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators for the 2018-2019 school year as submitted by the State Superintendent of Education. The LDE recommendation is to approve the waiver request regarding class size and ratios.
Do we have any comment cards on this item?
Yes, ma'am, we have one. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. No.
Never mind. Nope.
No,
Okay.
none.
Board members, do you have any questions or comments? Do you have any objection? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 5, item 4.1, consideration of the authorization of course providers for the Course Choice Program. The LD recommendation is to approve the authorization of Accelerate Education, Gateway EMS Training, and Sylvan Learning as course providers for the Course Choice Program beginning January 2019.
We have a comment card from Michael Falk with the Louisiana Superintendents Association. Louisiana Association. Oh, I'm sorry. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Oh, sorry.
And Jane, did we make a motion on 3.1?
I'm going to stop and let you guys do it. Oh,
All right.
Which one did you just read? Did you just read 3, 4?
4.1. Yeah, but 3.1, we handed you this. We had copies.
Tell me what you need to do.
We're going to go back to 3.1. On page 3, item 3.1, consideration of the local education agency request submitted by St. Martin Parish School System to waive policy outlined in Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators for the 2018-2019 school year as submitted by the State Superintendent of Education. The LDE recommendation is to approve the waiver request regarding class size and ratios.
Is there a motion?
Yes.
Dr. Thomason and a second by Ms. Holloway. Do we have any comment cards?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Board members, do you have any questions or comments? Do you have any objection? Hearing no objection, motion passes.
Your next item is on page 5, item 4.1, consideration of the authorization of course providers for the Course Choice Program. The LDE recommendation is to approve the authorization of Accelerate Education, Gateway EMS Training, and Sylvan Learning as course providers for the Course Choice Program beginning January 2019.
Is there a motion? Thank you, Mr. Rock. And a second by Ms. Edmonston. Does that work? Do you have what you need?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Falk. So he supports the recommendation, but he does not wish to speak. Mr. Falk, if you want to speak, come to the microphone. I like you waving at me, though. That's really nice.
Supposed to have been for the other committee. I probably put the wrong committee.
Academic goals. Okay, we'll get back with you and make sure that that we can get that straight. Okay. So, okay, board members, do you have any questions or comments? Do you have any objection? And we're on 4.1 about the course choice providers.
Yes.
No, are there any objections? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 16, item 5.4, consideration of the nomination for membership to the Test Irregularity Review Committee. The LDE recommendation is to approve the appointment of Ms. Jan Sibley, Mr. Dave Shayer, Dr. Charlie DePascal, Dr. Greg Sizek, and Ms. Alnita Miller to the Test Irregularity Review Committee to serve coterminously to BESE.
Board members, we need a motion. I see a motion by Dr. Jones and a second by Mr. Garvey. Do we have any public comment on this item?
All I'll say, members, is that if you'll recall, superintendents had requested the creation of this committee. I appreciate very much your patience in working with us on it. I also appreciate the assessment and accountability team led by Assistant Superintendent Bagian for developing this, and I think this is the right mix of players, national, state, and local, to make these important decisions. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Board members, do you have any questions or comments? Yes, Ms. Edmonston?
Did we skip 5.1?
5.1 is on the consent agenda. 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3 are all consent agenda items. So we took care of it before we moved to the first regular item. Right, board members, are there any questions about 5.4? Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 18, item 6.1, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 137, Louisiana Early Learning Center licensing regulations regarding penalties for operating an early learning center without a license. The LDE recommendation is to approve as notice of intent revisions to Bulletin 137 regarding penalties and technical edits.
Is there a motion? Thank you, Mr. Garvey.
Second.
Second by Mr. Davis. Do we have any comment cards?
No, ma'am.
Board members, do you have any questions on this item? Members, do you have any objection to this item? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 20, item 6.2, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 1530, Louisiana's IEP Handbook for Students with Exceptionalities regarding eligibility criteria for participation in the LEAP Connect alternate assessment. The LDE recommendation is to approve, as notice of intent, revisions to Bulletin 1530 regarding alternate assessment eligibility.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Garvey. We have a second by Ms. Holloway. Are the comment cards for this item?
Yes, ma'am.
I saw a stack somewhere. Okay. We'll hear from Sean Fleming, Emily Horvath, Korhonda Corley, and Michelle Lappin, please. If you'll all come down. I'm sorry? Okay, I do 4 at a time. I'll do 4 at a time. So the 4 that I called, if you could come up.
Ms. Botham?
Yes, Mr. Garvey.
Ms. McWhorter is kind of organizing the other 3 ladies, so you may want to let her speak first.
Okay,
To introduce the issue.
that sounds fine. Ann McWhorton, you can go ahead and come forward. Superintendent, do you want to provide any context to this issue?
Members, as you know, we have, over the last several years, evolved the assessments that students take. This includes a development of the LEAP Connect system. Because the guidance that is produced by the state has yielded a category of students that exceeds 1%, which is the intended federal target, and because the federal language has changed in the federal statutes regarding the 1% of what, we are revising our definition of LEAP Connect eligibility, which is a particularly kind of finely grained revision, but it will likely create a small adjustment downward in the percentage of students who are eligible for Leap Connect.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Sean Fleming with Louisiana Developmental Disabilities Council. I agree with Superintendent White. The changes are necessary. A few years ago, y'all revised them and made them more loose, and now you're just tightening them up. I really wanted to speak and commend the department for the process in allowing the Special Education Advisory Panel in really weighing in and providing recommendations that were put into this policy. The way that was done, I thought, really enabled them to see the language and to make specific recommendations and to know what's going on a lot better. And so I just wanted to commend them for that. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. McWhorton?
My name is Ann Dellery McWhorter. I am a national advocate for autism as both a self-advocate and as a parent advocate. I am here today to talk to you about how autism is going to increase in our state. If you look nationally, the criteria has just changed to 1 in 40. But as we're seeing on a national platform, they're expecting this to increase to 1 in 25. Our state needs to start to make accommodations and to have a plan that is ready to meet this need. We thought that we were making grounds in January of last year. During the legislative session, our legislature passed Act 696. What Act 696 does is allow for outside mental health and behavioral health providers to come into the school system and conduct therapy. In terms of autism, this becomes very vital. The gold standard for an intervention wraparound approach within autism therapies would be sensory inclusion and ABA therapy. ABA therapy is applied behavior analysis. It has over 30 years of data-driven research behind it. There are other countries and other states who have already allowed for ABA therapists in the school system, most notably Maine and Canada. When you apply the fiscal gains, they span between $30,000 to $52,000 per student per year. When you add that up with the minimum amount of $30,000 per student with autism in Louisiana, you come to the entire operating budget for the state of Louisiana Department of Education for 1 fiscal year. So what we have seen is that we see parish by parish different ways that they are implementing these policies. We are here today representing over 700 parents and families across the state of Louisiana, requesting that the Department of Education weigh in with one policy on how this bill will be implemented for our students across the state. Instead of going and fighting parish by parish, losing time that these children need intervention. The faster they get the intervention, and it's critical within an age limit, that is the highest predictor of whether or not those people will live or have independent living throughout their lives. We're asking you to come together to give the guidelines for Department of Education to advise our state so that our children can be helped. Many children across our state are being harmed. We would like for this to stop.
Thank you. Go ahead. Start by introducing yourself, please. Is it green light on?
Yes.
Okay.
Hello. Oh, okay. My name is Michelle Lappin. I am an administrator from the Implement Act 696 group that represents over 700 families in Louisiana. Parents have been asking for ABA services in home and school since 1998 with the Donna Slocum case, and since 2013 when the Chisholm case, when Medicaid began covering ABA. Medicaid even recommends services be allowed in multiple natural settings as best practices and for better outcomes and continuity of care. This means services should be individualized and occur in home and classroom and are most effective at 15+ hours. I'm a parent of a child with autism. Last year, my son began to regress in his self-contained classroom. He began to have severe behaviors. He had been in ABA for numerous years, so he had made a lot of progress, but when those services that were not allowed in the classroom, he began to regress, and he made no academic progress for 5 months. We were forced to choose between medically necessary therapy or school, and we did choose therapy. In the year that he's been at therapy, he has made tremendous strides in education and behavior that he was not making when he was in school. And so that's where a lot of families are finding themselves, is fighting for these services to be allowed so that better outcomes could, for better outcomes for our kids. We were very excited when Act 696 was passed in June of this year. It allowed for behavioral health providers to provide services privately paid by the parents to come into the school system and provide mental health and behavioral health services. These services include, from a psychologist, psychiatrist, a mental health provider, and also ABA therapy services. What we found, though, was the parishes, because the law allows the school boards to make their own policies, some parishes had open policies which allowed mental and behavioral health providers, including ABA, and then other parishes created barriers to accessing the services, including limiting the amount of time the providers could be in the school, not allowing the providers in class, increasing the insurance liabilities to block these services from coming in. School systems are under the impression that Act 696 is strictly a mental health law. So their policies make sense, except some parishes with strong ABA centers are making more open policies. So it'd be different if all the school boards were making the same policy, but they're not. So services in schools are varying by zip code. The restrictions are detrimental to the effectiveness of these services because ABA is best utilized in the classroom where behaviors can be observed and managed, which is provided for in the language of the bill. Some of the policies are discriminatory against children with autism, like East Baton Rouge policy. Policies like this could result in due process suits and legal ramifications if schools create barriers that make accessing these services difficult. We would really appreciate guidance from BESE so Act 696 school board policies are uniform, individualized, and accessible.
Thank you. Next.
Good morning. My name is Karonda Corley, and I am a national advocate. I'm also an administrator for Implement Act 696, and I want to speak to you in regards to EBR school system. My child is 4 years old, and he was abused by the teacher and paraprofessionals at school. He has a diagnosis of autism, and he's nonverbal. As a parent, watching your child choke another school board member is very frightening and is disheartening. We did end up learning that the teacher and the paraprofessionals do not know how to deal with children with behavior, nor children with special needs. EBR has a school district that has special education students, 852 in elementary school alone. 852 special education students in elementary school alone that would benefit from this service. My child is the only child in EBR school system that is now benefiting from having ABA in the school system. His ABA team is being asked not only by the teacher and the paraprofessionals, but also by his speech therapist, occupational therapist, and adaptive PE to actually assist them with dealing with these behaviors. These children can benefit from this, and this actually helped the children fall in line with IDEA and receiving a free and appropriate public education. Due to our teachers and paraprofessionals not knowing the definition for behavior, our children are having their civil rights violated, and our school systems are not falling in line with American Disabilities Act, IDEA, free and appropriate public education, Bulletin 1530, Bulletin 1706, and I can continue with more. It is disheartening as a parent to watch your child have night terrors. It is disheartening to watch your child regress back to the stage of an infant. It is disheartening as a parent to not be able to do anything for your child at all and have to have your child removed from school and have to homeschool your child because the school system did not know how to handle it. It is disheartening that I am having to pay for this service when it's included in the IEP. It is disheartening when the clinical psychologist has ruled that the school system has failed him on every level by not even having the simple accommodations that he required according to his IEP, but yet the parent has to is subjected to having to pay this bill. It is a requirement by federal law and state law that BESE provide each child with a free and appropriate public education. Supreme Court has ruled on it many times. It has also been documented that children with special needs can become potential great working civilized citizens in the community, and that this state right here has lost more than $1.8 billion in revenue due to the children not being educated. So I applaud, and I would urge with great urgency that BESE put an act, a bulletin that would actually be unified across the state and not discriminatory. Thank you.
Emily?
Hi, I'm Emily Horvath. My son Luke is he was diagnosed with autism at 2.5 years old. He had limited verbal skills and behaviors related to sensory needs. He is now 5 and attends a private preschool where he has a one-to-one registered behavioral therapist providing ABA services in the classroom with neurotypical peers in an inclusive environment. We kind of have found that he has thrived in this environment, being with other kids his same age, with other kids. His therapist provides the ABA therapy during instructional time to support Luke as well as the teacher. They minimize behaviors and increase support as Luke needs. So if he is doing good, they back off. The more support he needs, that's when they're more using their ABA techniques to help him. My concern is that if Luke goes to kindergarten next year, that they will not allow the ABA therapist to go with him, or will create barriers that will stop that from happening. If he does not have the appropriate accommodations to meet his unique and individual needs, I'm really concerned about where we're going to go with it. I'm not alone in this fear. There are over 700 families across the state, as well as within my own parish, who share these same fears for their children. So I would also like to please consider BESE to offer guidance to the school board to ensure these policies are consistent, accessible, and will meet the unique and individual needs of the child. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Edmonston, are the comments that we just heard connected to the same issue that you wanted to discuss relative to this particular item? Do you have any questions or comments that you would like to make at this point?
I do, but I'd first like to
grab your mic, Ms. Edmonston. Thanks, ladies.
I'm sorry. I'd like for Superintendent White to kind of talk about the difference in the legislation, Act 696, and the role of the department and the role of BESE. Can you do that? Yeah.
Sure.
Just for the public's general information.
Sure. And we've not met, but I'm happy that you're here and would be happy to speak. You know, this is a pretty tricky legal issue, so we'd be happy to talk. I know you're probably talking with some of my staff, but so I don't know the issue that well. But what I sense the issue is that there's a requirement that behavioral specialists be able to access school systems. And yet, as with many laws, both the way that the committee testimony played out and the way that the statute ultimately was written doesn't direct the department to do something. It simply says this shall happen in the schools. And when there isn't an explicit role given for BESE or for the department, most often it's BESE, then the presumption is that actually the legislature is speaking directly to the school systems and telling them to do something, not telling the state to create, not telling the board here to create rules that then again tell them to do something. There are other laws where the legislature will say, BESE members, you need to create something that tells the school system to do this. That wasn't the case in this instance. At the same time, I don't think anyone probably disagrees on the substance of what's being discussed, which is how do we get to the place where young people of all backgrounds and needs have their needs met by the personnel who are equipped and credentialed to do the things that are needed. And so I think we should probably meet, analyze the law, evaluate who needs to be at the table to have the discussion, and find a way to get to the point at which you're describing. Whether or not the law allows BESE to get there is a question I would need to talk to our lawyers about. But let's certainly sit down and have the discussion.
Madam Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Garvey.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit to the superintendent. We talked to Ms. Bindley on your staff about this issue, and she said basically what you just said. And an idea that we discussed was instead of issuing mandatory guidance, maybe the department could find some examples around the state where this is being implemented well to the satisfaction of the parents and the administrators, and publish something to the local school districts that they can look at and see as a good example. And I think Ms. Bindley is working on that. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Ward?
Thank you. This is already in play in Jefferson Parish. ABA's therapists are already allowed from outside within the parish. They are leading the way throughout the state. This is the cornerstone or the model or the template that we would like to see in every parish across the state.
And we mentioned Jefferson Parish to Ms. Bindley, so she's going to be looking at it specifically. And it looks like things are moving in a good direction, and we hope they continue that way, and we'll see. And if not, we'll report back.
And you'll put it as an item on the agenda?
Yes.
In a timely fashion?
I think
yes,
so.
Ms. Holloway?
I have to say I have experience with the ABA services, and because it is in a local school in Lafourche, and also Terrebonne, Assumption, and there are other districts that are utilizing it, and there's been some positiveness in this support service. So I really would like to see more talk about it, like we're discussing at this moment, about the law. And I think what's happening is that there are districts that are not quite understanding what's required, what's the law, and expecting BESE to come forward or the State Department. And I'm also hearing districts are developing their own guidelines. So every district is different. I can just tell you through experience, it has been beneficial and has been working. So.
Thank you, members. We're going to go ahead and go back to Ms. Edmonston. Did you have anything else? Because I'm really trying to prevent like a back and forth here.
Okay. I don't have anything for the ladies, but Ms. Bindley just walked in, and I was just wondering, John, if you felt like she had anything to add. She was planning on kind of giving an overview. And really, my purpose for even bringing this is so that there would be some guidance as to our department understanding the legislation, when I don't think every district understands exactly what it means. So my only reason for doing this was just to allow the public, teachers, superintendents, parents to all understand really what was intended by the legislation. So Ms. Bindley, if you wouldn't mind, would you?
You know, I think I probably have covered everything Ms. Bindley is going to say. Not that I always think Ms. Bindley has something to add,
she's really better than you in a lot of it,
she's better than me in the vast majority. I want to get that on the record. Nevertheless, I think probably we've talked through the law and so on. I think we should just discuss, and we'll make sure that happens. And then if the board would like to have an item on the agenda to discuss the implementation of this act, we can do that. I agree with Mr. Garvey. It's probably not a regulatory solution. It's probably a guidance and evidence-based solution. So let's come back and have the discussion, and I'll look forward to a positive report at a future meeting. On the item is about a tweak to the threshold of eligibility for the Leap Connect.
Thank you. And we got one comment specific to the item, praising the involvement of SEEP in this process. And then board members, do you have any other questions or concerns that you'd like to talk about before we take a vote on this item? Do you have any objections to this item? Yes, Ms. Edmonston?
Yeah.
Is that an objection or a question?
This is, I'm not sure what it is. We went back to talking about the LEAP alternate assessment, correct?
Yes.
That's really what we were supposed to be discussing. I remember at Ms. Holloway, who co-chairs the SEEP Special Ed Advisory Panel, was not here. We had the meeting in Ascension, and I remember us talking about a lot about the adaptive part of the LEAP. And I'm looking at Ms. Wong, who was there, and I would like to know, did we get that worked out? We did.
It's reflected in the policy, and I'm seeing nods from the audience.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, board members, do we have any objection? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 25, item 7.1, consideration of the summary of public comments and agency response concerning public comment received in reference to the November 20th, 2018 Notice of Intent regarding Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators, Section 3301 Definitions, 3305 Application Process, 3307 Instructor, 3309 Curriculum, 3311 Testing, 3313 Admission or Readmission to the Public School System, 3315 Due Process, and 3317 Cost. The LDE recommendation is to receive this SPCAR regarding revisions to Bulletin 741, authorize BESE staff to submit the summary report to the Legislative Oversight Committees, and direct BESE staff to proceed with the final adoption of the November 20th, 2018 Notice of Intent regarding revisions to Bulletin 741 at the appropriate time.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. We need a second. Thank you, Ms. Foche. Do we have any comment cards? Okay. Ms. Moore, Diane Moore. Is the green light on, Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Okay.
My name is Diane Moore, and I'm here again to restate that the inclusion of homeschoolers in Bulletin 741 is outside of BESE authority according to the state constitution and law. First, some background. Years ago, I left teaching in the Louisiana public school system and chose to homeschool. I teach homeschool students U.S. government and mock trial and debate. One of the first lessons my government students learn is that the U.S. is not and never has been a democracy. Our founders knew that a democracy by majority rule leads to mob rule, so the founders set up our government as a republic where citizens are governed by the rule of law. In my mock trial class, students learn that the job of the courts is not to rule guilty or innocent. The job of the courts is to ensure that the law is upheld. In October, when I spoke before BESE, I methodically laid out why homeschooling is not under BESE authority other than BESE's authority to approve home study and provide readmission criteria for homeschoolers returning to the public school system. I cited relevant sections of our state constitution and gave the specific laws which apply to homeschoolers. Rather than looking into my claims and the law, my claims were quickly dismissed because homeschoolers have been included in Bulletin 741 since 2005. Even my students were quick to see that unjust inclusion in a bulletin does not suddenly become legal just because it has been done without challenge for 13 years. So for review, Article 8, Section 3 of the Louisiana Constitution limits BESE's authority to, quote, public elementary and secondary schools under its jurisdiction. Revised Statute 17.6, the statute that the agency response cites as an authority, limits BESE authority to, quote, public elementary and secondary schools under its jurisdiction. Even Bulletin 741, the very bulletin that you are adding rules to regarding homeschooling, begins with the words, policies passed by the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education govern the operation of public elementary, middle, and secondary schools. The law and Constitution are repetitively clear that BESE does not have the authority it is purporting to have over homeschoolers. Today, you are my students' teachers. What will you teach my students today? Will you teach that we are a nation of laws and that authority submits to the rule of law? Will you teach that citizens speaking out in support of law will be heard and recognized and that law will prevail? Or will you teach that absolute power corrupts absolutely and ignore the law to claim unjust power? Consider your decisions and actions carefully. The next generation is watching you.
Board members, do you have any comments or questions? Board members, do you have any objections to the item? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
That concludes your agenda.